Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. Welcome back, everybody. We are very happy to have Miss Jec Ballou with us today. Jec believes that fitness is the focus, and no matter the discipline, your horse is an athlete first. She was raised in a dressage farm and family in Vermont and further studied and still continues to study throughout Europe. She realized in her career about 15 years ago that most of the struggles really stem from horses not using their bodies well. She now works on teaching strengthening, coordination, flexibility, and improving muscle imbalances. She is the author of 101 Dressage Exercises for Horse and Rider, which is endorsed by the US Dressage Federation and as a critical for everyone to own book. She also has written Equine Fitness, 101 Western Dressage Exercises for Horse and Rider, 55 Corrective Exercises for Horses, and the humorous book, The Unscheduled Dismount. Jec, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing well, thanks. Gosh, when you read all that, it makes it sound like it's a lot of work, and it was a lot of work.
It's a lot. Let me tell you, that's written down on paper. That might be the longest one I've had so far. That's a bunch. Congratulations. That's
thanks.
Took a lot of effort, I'm sure. Well, we start off everybody with the lightning round questions to break the ice, and I just want to warn you that these are for points and prizes, so take this real seriously, all right?
Okay, I am fiercely competitive, so let's go.
First and foremost, if you were a Jedi, what % chance would there be that you'd use the Force inappropriately?
Okay, this one's funny because I'm not even sure I know what a Jedi is, so I'm going to just play it safe and go 50% chance. I'm going to write them all.
Okay, let's say like a wizard, or witch. You could levitate things and crush stuff with your mind and things like that, and feel the future and other people's pain. It's just like limitless power, basically. Lightning bolts out of your fingertips, all kind of good stuff like that.
Okay, so what's the percentage that I would use that for not good outcomes, you're asking?
Well, good's a relative term. Let's just say not according to the specified rules you were taught. Would you sometimes levitate that cup of coffee across the room to get up, not have to get up on a cold winter morning to go get it? Or if you were stuck in traffic, might you just move that guy the hell out of your way with your mind? Or, how would you go
so
around?
probably pretty high. Yeah, I think I would probably be outside my lane all the time with those powers.
I think you're the most honest person to ever answer that question so far. Morning or evening?
Morning.
All right. Do you have a favorite way to treat aches and pains?
Kind of depends on the day. I am super hippy dippy, so on any given day, it could be arnica, it could be foam rolling, it could be a ginormous glass of wine. It just depends on the day.
What was
Sometimes
the first thing you said?
Arnica.
What is that?
It's a leaf extract. Usually comes in gel form.
Okay.
Put it on topical, bruises, sore muscles. Some people, I swear by it. I swear by it. But of course, some people will say, well, there's no science to that. It doesn't work. And I said, look, even if it's just psychological and it makes me feel better, haven't I accomplished my aim?
So that's your Jedi powers right there. You just didn't even know. Okay, so this one I have a choice on, but since you wrote a book called The Unscheduled Dismount, when's the last time you ate some dirt, Jec?
It was, I think, about 2 years ago, and the not so hysterical part was it was from this tiny pony. It was one of those ponies that's so small it's kind of hard to stay on. They're so squirrely. I want to say this little, maybe it was 12 hands, really small. And it was during the first part of COVID. So my little tiny assistant trainer, she's very petite and would have been way more suitable to ride the pony. She wasn't coming to the barn, it's just me. And I had this little tiny pony in training. And It was I think sitting on a saddle rack is actually more solid than this little pony was. And anyway, I asked it to pick up a canter one day and it turned into a mini bronc and there just wasn't anything under me to hang on to or grip into. I just came sailing right off.
That's fair enough. Do you have a favorite beverage?
Let the coffee, I think. Lots of coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you tell us something totally unexpected about you?
Totally unexpected. I guess people in my real inner circle know, but I have a strange amount of stuff with Hello Kitty on it.
Okay.
And that throws some people. It throws some people. So
I did not see that coming yet.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's all right. Um, if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Oh man, that's tough. I think like the kind of strength to like pick up a car and move it, like if you could call it up, that's sort of major adrenaline strength. You could just hit a button and make that happen. I wouldn't want to fly because I'm afraid of heights. So I think I'd go with like raw, indescribable strength.
You need to look into Jedi's. I'm telling you.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
Thoughts or feelings?
Oh, that's really interesting you separated them because my degree is in philosophy and we studied this ad nauseum on whether you can actually separate them. And to be honest, I haven't made up my mind about whether they can be parsed like that. So
Well,
I'm gonna go feelings because I'm not sure that thoughts ever fully override feelings.
okay. Well, how about this? A seesaw isn't separated, but it does lean one way more than the other.
That's true.
All right.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I'm leaning towards feelings.
and if you think about thoughts and feelings in terms of the brain, feelings are way more primitive than thoughts. So I think you're right about thoughts
Yeah.
not overriding feelings because feelings are way more deep down in there. Um,
Yeah.
are you decisive or indecisive?
I'm decisive, but I think about things a long time. Not
Okay.
not forever, but I definitely am somebody who I think about it and then I take action. And when I take action, there's not a lot of waffling around.
Okay. So you're pensive. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse related tool?
I was just thinking about that the other day because I just got back from Portugal. And I am a huge fan of the lunge cavessons, and I feel like they're just getting better and better and better. And for people who really like getting into groundwork, I just think they're such an incredible tool to have. So I'm pretty passionate about lunge cavessons.
I have to say I don't have one yet, but that's probably going to be one of those things I'm going to have to pick up here before long and play with. Um, do you have a favorite book or movie?
I'm pretty bad at watching movies because I'm not great at sitting still, but so I'm gonna go book. Anything written by Anne Patchett, I love. I love good characters and a sense of place. Anthony Doerr is another phenomenal author. It's hard to pick just one, but those authors I really like for their character development.
Okay. What about I'm looking forward to the answer to this one because I know what a disciplined person you are. But do you have a guilty pleasure?
Oh yeah, yeah, all kinds. So I live in California, so I like to partake of the wine here. I like to eat chocolate, guilty pleasure. I don't really like loaf, like I said, I don't really loaf around and watch movies, but what else counts as it? For me, a guilty pleasure is like I got an extra hour. I'm gonna go ride my mountain bike. For some people, like I know that sounds awful, but for me, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna play hooky and go get lost in the forest.
Oh, I think that's great. Yeah. Do you have a favorite dinosaur or deep sea creature?
Wow, these questions are way out there. I don't think I know enough about dinosaurs. Although I did go to the museum outside Moab that has, no, outside Fruita, Colorado, like this huge archaeological dinosaur museum. And I realized how few varieties I actually knew. But what's that little squatty one? Was it the Squatty one with the short neck. Oh my God, I'm blanking on his
And
name.
the three horns,
Yeah,
Triceratops.
that's it. I think I'm kind of I like the look of that one.
That is my favorite dinosaur as well. It looks like you could just ride him and just run shit over, doesn't it? I mean, like he'd just be a tank.
Like he's sturdy. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, and have you ever had a UFO encounter?
I don't know for sure, but my parents were really big into exploring conspiracy theories and whatnot when I was growing up. So they were always pointing out things in the skies as evidence of UFOs. And I mean, as a kid, I was totally bought all into it. So, but I don't know if they were actually, I can't say that they were UFOs. I can tell you my friends thought I was a total weirdo, though.
That's been one of the ones that has surprised me. I'm a little surprised, honestly. I really picked all these kind of at random just to break the ice, but you really learn unexpected things about people. Like the indecisive, decisive one, you took about as long as any decisive person takes. Most decisive people immediately answer that they're decisive. The indecisive people give me a 3-minute pause that I have to edit out before they say that they're indecisive. Uh, and I put that one in there specifically because of Maddie. Actually, she caused that question to spontaneously grow. The UFO encounter, about 50% of the people say they have had one. How about that? That's way higher than I thought it would be.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So anyway, okay, well that's for points. Jec, you competitive person, you have the highest score of any person that has ever played this game to date, 692 points. And that entitles you to your choice of either an awkward pause or a genuine compliment.
Do you tell all your guests the same point number?
No,
Is that
I do not. I don't
okay?
remember what the previous points were, so I make sure the points of the next guest are higher than the points of the previous guest. So it's a
Okay.
exponentially growing.
So I'm gonna have to come back on the show then to keep my ranking.
Yeah,
Well, I get enough awkward pauses in my day. I'm pretty good at those. So how about what was the second option? A compliment?
genuine compliment. Yes,
Yeah, I'm gonna go with that one.
all right. Well, I will say that this immediately springs to mind about you because I think you're legitimately someone you can call a world recognized expert on equine mechanics and fitness and bringing a horse back into rehab, and yet you're very, very humble about it and full of imposter syndrome, not sure whether you really belong in the category or not, and why do people keep treating you like you're an expert and asking you questions about this. And I think that's a phenomenal frame of mind to be in. So congratulations on your humility.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. That's an interesting way to put it. Appreciate that.
Let's see. How about we'll just start things off for those who may not be real familiar with you. Would you just kind of give us the 30,000-foot view of what it is that you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, I like to say that I train and teach what dressage used to be and what it was intended to be. When I see modern dressage today, I don't always recognize what it even is, but dressage was and is physical therapy for the horse. Essentially, it is helping the horse move in balance so that you're not wrecking its joints, so that they can have longevity, so that their muscular and skeletal system works in harmony. And this goes back to when I was raised in a horse training family. My dad was a high level combined driving competitor, and my mom was a dressage riding instructor, and I leaned more towards endurance riding, long distance trail riding as a kid. But we always prepared all the horses for those three very different disciplines in the same fashion. They followed the same conditioning schedule on a weekly basis. So it wasn't like the dressage horses only went around the arena and did 20-meter circles. And that stuck with me, that cross training and that multidisciplinary approach really, really stuck with me. As I went out on my own as a professional and started encountering all of these broken dressage horses, I started just getting more and more grouchy about it. And actually, interestingly, I kind of crossed paths with Jim Masterson back in the day. It was almost 20 years ago when I first moved to California. And he was also fixing broken dressage horses. And that's when I started writing my books and really getting kind of fired up about helping people just restore what I call healthy movement to their horse. So it's not branded, it's not like a particular discipline. It's like, let's just get the horse being an athlete first. Forget about trying to specialize in your discipline, because a lot of times it's the discipline and it's the all that restriction that's creating a lot of the problems. So I know that's a pretty unclear way of saying what I do. I mean, in a basic way, I give clinics and I teach and I have online courses and the books, like you mentioned, and just trying to spread the good word and keep learning as much as I can. I'm still a student myself.
Well, I think that's very well said and very verbosely said for a New Englander. So
Right.
congratulations on that. I know you warned me you were going to be short, and I'm like, no, she's doing great. Um, uh, well, let me ask you this. This is honestly one of those things that has puzzled me. Or I got a few prongs to come out here. So you were mentioning about the original purpose of dressage. I mean, they literally call it gymnastics, right? That
Yeah.
that should say a little something there. So you're more on the classical end. In your mind, is there a point at which classical dressage and what we might call modern dressage, where that road forked? Like, was that in the 80s, the 90s, the 2003, the such and such an event that it happened, or where do you think that came from?
Oh, that's a really good question. I wouldn't say I have the answer specifically, but I do remember, like, in the early to mid 90s, at least where I was, and again, that was in the Northeast, but there was quite a bit of dressage there. People at that time were just riding whatever they had. They were riding their Morgan, who they also might go horse camping and teach to carriage drive as well, which was cool. You just rode what you had and you tried to help that horse become the best it was. But I remember it was around the early 90s. So that would have been when Nicole Uphoff was competing from Germany, and the German team was really strong. And some of these Americans started going over to Europe and importing big fancy warm bloods. And at that time, it was kind of a rare thing. Not every Tom, Dick, and Harry was importing warm bloods then. And the horses for competitive dressage started to become a particular style. And if you wanted to stay in the game, you kind of needed to get these. You weren't going to show up at the dressage show on your fjord and beat the pants off these warm bloods. And there started to be a division, as I saw it, around the mid 90s. And then, it became more accessible to go to Europe and import these horses, and suddenly there were dealers. And as the type of horse changed and became, I mean, the breeding in Europe is really, really good. And it's almost unfortunate because these horses are so athletic. I mean, maybe it's similar in the quarter horse world. These horses are so athletic and they have such good minds that you can unfortunately hurry the training in the early years, and they really pay the price for it later. But to get those horses ready to sell or even compete early and go to shows younger and younger, they started cutting corners and the training became something I don't really recognize anymore. So I would say towards the late 90s there started to be kind of a division. And I know there are a few groups that splintered off to try to be like have classical dressage, to try to have their own competitions and whatnot. And I think a couple of them are still hanging on a bit, not with the same degree of notoriety perhaps as the USDF, but I think dressage became more stylized at that point. I think it became the training shifted a little bit more towards competition, but also more like away from just basic training. Like, hey, is your horse sane enough to ride across this river? Like, can you ride your horse without feeling like he's going to kill you down the road? I mean, I can't tell you the number of students I come across that, I mean, I went to a dressage show a couple of years ago. It was a day show, so I tied my horse to the trailer. Daniel, I'm not kidding. The owner of the facility came up to me and told me it was unsafe to tie my horse to a trailer, that I needed to stop. I was like, are you crazy? Like, shouldn't your horse be trained enough to stand tied somewhere? Anyway, that was my own rant.
No, no, no. I'm right there with you. I don't deal with a ton of dressage horses, but I start a decent number of them, and I fix a decent number of them once they've gotten to having some significant problems. And every time I deal with the older ones, I am shocked at the basic stuff that they don't know or don't do. And like you're saying, like tie it. I mean, it would be unfathomable to me to have a 10-year-old that you can't tie to something and walk away and expect him to be there and alive when you get back, you know. But that seems to be common. I just don't understand. Just for the lazy convenience aspect of things. I mean,
Right.
how much easier is your life if you can just do that and walk away and they're going to be alive when you get back. You know? But anyway, well, that brings up another thought to me. You're talking about the fork in the road. That also changed the style of horses quite a bit. So like when I think of dressage, I'm thinking of the classical Baroque horses, the Andalusians, the Lipizans, the Lusitanos, and those horses are all characterized to me as having a pretty thick middle, like they're built like I am, you know. Mm-hmm. And you don't see that at all in the dressage world anymore. Now the horse's belly is 4 feet off of the ground and he's got legs like a spider. Do you think that the form followed the function there, or did what they needed the horses to do in order to win just those horses built more classically couldn't get away with that anymore? You have a thought on that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I have spoken with a few breeders of the Iberian breeds that you reference, and they have been very intentionally, not all of them certainly, but some of them have been very intentionally breeding to be more competitive on the global dressage scene. So that would mean taller and leggier, because historically Andalusians and Lusitanos were not a super tall breed. Mm-hmm. They have become taller and more warm-bloody, to use that terminology. So yeah, leaner through the middle, leggier, springier. The croup angle is a little bit different. And those have been intentional things that they've gone in pursuit of. And similarly with the warm blood, yeah, my understanding is, talking to the European breeders, that they have been more and more selective with the types of gaits that are so elastic, almost hypermobile. There's a downside of this too. Like, I'm encountering students who have imported horses from Europe who their movement is just jaw-dropping when you watch these horses trot or canter. It's kind of mind-bending how they move. There's like everything's spring-loaded. But
I describe them as Pepe Le Pew. That's bing, bing, bing. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, just elasticity for days. But a lot of them are hypermobile, so there have been increasing problems with that show up later with it'll seem like a neurological deficit, so instability in the base of the neck and things like that have to do with this hypermobility. That's hopefully it doesn't get worse. I've been encountering a fair bit of it in the last couple years, and so probably the breeders will correct course. But that's just an interesting side note, I think, on that note.
That really is. Like, we actually, I would say in the quarter horse world, we're going the other way. We're getting into steeper and steeper shoulders and horses that can't reach up in front of themselves hardly at all anymore. Really, like when I look at the conformation of a horse, the racing quarter horses kind of still have it, but most of our performance lines, we have just totally messed the shoulder up on those horses.
Is that so they're more, so they can move more quickly, like so they're more agile? What's the thinking there?
I don't think there is thinking. I think they're breeding winners to winners, and I think things that we're not paying attention to are occurring, and nobody's noticing it. Like I mean, for God's sake, we're breeding a stallion known to promote the deafness gene in reining right now.
Oh, that's right.
The top stallion has got a known genetic defect, and they're mass producing him as fast as they can. That never would have been ethically allowed 30 years ago, and now it is. You know, so I think something like a steep shoulder and I mean, like, my goodness, all of a sudden we're getting navicular problems all over the place. I wonder why that could. I mean, there's just no connection there in the front end that could possibly.
No, of course not.
complete mystery. Okay, anyway, there's my soapbox. I appreciate the opportunity to smack the reining world in the death thing. That horse should have been a gelding about day 6 of birth, but anyway, okay. I've lost my thought on a tangent now. Well, so what other trends do you see in the dressage world that might be handled better, or do you think it's moving in a better direction already, and we're kind of getting away from some of the super specialized hypermobile problems?
Yeah, I mean that's it. I sometimes feel like I'm in my own silo, so probably can't speak real accurately to the big picture of competitive dressage in this country. That said, I have seen some heard some positive things in recent years. I mean, dressage at its core should be enjoyable for horse and rider. Never mind these like really serious, constipated looking photos we all have of each other when we're concentrating and riding our horses. It should be enjoyable and fun. And for many, many adult amateurs, it is something they pursue. And if you ask them, what discipline do you do? They'll say, I'm a dressage rider. I feel like that's starting to be acknowledged again. Maybe 15 years ago, it was like, well, if you do dressage, quote unquote, you either compete and you have this certain kind of horse and you follow these certain circles of trainers and whatnot, or you're not really in dressage. And our dressage came out of the cavalry. It wasn't even, I like to remind people, it wasn't even something that citizens like the laymen and women were able to practice until the late 60s. So it's still relatively young, but it's interesting to me it became so snooty. You know what I mean? Like
it's simultaneously old and young.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
I feel like there's a trend back towards acknowledging that plenty of people want to do this sport because it's good for their horse. And it's relatively safe. You're not flinging yourself over jumps on a cross-country course or other things you could be doing in your adult years. And that is no less dignified than putting on your fancy outfit and going to a show. And I feel like there's been some initiatives to, re-welcome those riders. And I'm in that camp, back into the fold. So I hope that continues to grow.
I like it. For me, even before I really studied dressage at all, I got turned on to Nuno Oliveira, and you can even go to YouTube and look at videos. And I mean, he's just relaxed, riding in one hand, doing a piaffe half the time, smoking a little cigar, like looks like he's thinking about going fishing this afternoon or something. I mean, there's none of the intensity and just neuroticism that you see sometimes now. You just kind of wonder, like, how did we go from that to that in 40 years, But anyway, it would be great to see it go back. And that kind of transitions us neatly into your recent trip to Portugal, because I believe that trip had a connection with Nuno. So would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was fabulous. I used to take students to Portugal for, I think it was like 8 years in a row in the early 2000s. And then I stopped going. I don't remember why. And then as time does, time flew by. So I hadn't been back in about 12 years. And it was just wonderful to go back. So I actually joined our colleague, Patrick King, over there. And there were a couple other trainers who also went, and it was phenomenal. We were at the riding school of Senor Luis Valencia and his daughters, and that family, for anybody that remembers the traveling horse theater group called Appassionata, they toured throughout Europe and gave these amazing shows. I mean, it was like Cavalia, but even better, for more than a decade, I think. And they still have a show that they participate in called Cavaluna that tours through Europe. And anyway, they have a school right outside Lisbon where you can go and have lessons on these phenomenal horses that were in the show. And they're just unbelievable schoolmasters and wonderful horses. And the instruction is top notch. It was fabulous.
Well, very good. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna take this opportunity to selfishly ask a newbie question because I've heard this term schoolmaster multiple times, and I feel like I've gotten varying answers as to what that is. So, is a schoolmaster a fancy lesson horse, or is this the pinnacle horse? How would you define that for some cowboy that just came walking up and said,
I
"Hey,
like your definition of fancy lesson horse. Yeah, that is, in this case, it's fancy lesson horse that is trained to the highest level, like the highest level. And so, yeah, fancy horse who packs around students who can do all the fancy stuff.
So he's like a Ferrari with forgiveness, kind of all
Yeah,
around.
but
Uh,
won't give it up for free, which is cool because you don't want to just sit there and have the horse be doing all these awesome things and you're feeling like you're, all that in a bag of chips. Like these horses, like if you don't cue them right, they don't do it, which is amazing because they know what you want. But
mhm.
bless their little hearts, they don't give it up for free. That's great.
They've got that feeling of how special they are, right? I like it. Well, I did want to ask you about Western dressage because you have got a book on it, and I had a comment to ask you about it that you do some Western dressage clinics, and I wanted to ask you on that topic: is Western dressage riders playing cowboy or cowboys playing dressage riders?
It's really interesting. It kind of goes, you kind of see both. I was invited to be part of Western dressage when it first formed. And I don't know why they picked little old me because, well, I guess they wanted somebody who was sort of more Englishy. And I joined the group out in Colorado, Cliff Swanson and Francis Carbonell and Julie Goodnight was on the troop. It was really neat to sit in this room with colleagues and we had to write the rules. And those were interesting conversations because the question that you just asked came up a lot. It was like, okay, are we gonna do walk pirouettes or are they gonna be turn on the haunches? Okay, well, if they're turn on the haunches, are they gonna pivot on their hind leg or are they gonna pick it up and put it down? And it seemed like splitting hairs, but it really was like, no, we're trying to define how Englishy or how Westerny this is gonna be.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a really interesting challenge. I think it comes down to helping the judges get more training, is what I've heard. Some of the judges say we need more tools. We're not sure how to judge this. The USDF judges want to welcome it. That's been my experience. They're excited about the discipline, but they don't always know how to judge it. I think I've seen more I guess that they're English riders playing cowboy, to use your terminology, rather than the other way. But I say that kind of with quotes around it because it's been folks who didn't have any structure before. So they might ride an English saddle, but mainly they were trail riding or just kind of going to the occasional Buck Brannaman clinic or horse camping, whatnot. And then they transitioned into Western dressage. I've seen more of that than like, cowboys getting interested in it. That said, I have seen some amazing crossover between reining trainers and Western dressage, which has been really cool for me to see.
So I have a genuine stupid question. I seldom ask questions I don't kind of know the answer to, but this one I really don't. So as far as I know, in Western dressage, you can ride two hands with reins on a shanked bit, but you're not riding in a double bridle. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so if you're just contact in a shanked bit, that is a whole game changer between what a Western horse would be used to and what a dressage horse would be used to. So how does that play
Exactly.
out?
And that, well, to be honest, that has been one of the primary difficulties in judging this. I mean, at the lower levels, that point is moot because everybody's kind of riding two-handed in a snaffle and they're just trying to get the basics down. When it gets to the point where second, third level, where you might put the shank on and people are riding two-handed and they're looking for the same amount of contact that they would say in an English test, that's where it gets to be a little bit troublesome. Or let's say they show up with a draped rein, which I think the judges would score higher if the horse was actually engaged
collected.
behind.
Yeah,
But
bridled.
a lot of times the folks, unfortunately, that are riding, one-handed or with a draped rein, the horses are, to be honest, are just moving terribly. So again, it's going to come down to judges' education, I think. And there has been a lot of behind the scenes conversation on, look, just maybe we require, the absence of contact. When I say that, I mean like pressure in the rein, right? Like, so maybe we say at a certain level, the horse should be totally in self carriage and the rider should ride one handed. I think at this point, they just get extra points for that in the collective marks.
Okay, you're just binging. I've got questions lighting off left and right here. It's gonna be hard to stick to my list here. Do you mind getting a little deeper into this,
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so you brought up self carriage and you brought up engagement from the rear. So as an experienced dressage rider, what percentage would you say the bridle plays in collection or self carriage? Like, is it 25% holding the horse in, 75% seat and legs driving and lifting, or like what balance would you say? Or I know it could differ for each horse, but in your mind, where do you?
God, like maybe 10%?
Okay.
Like
No,
that. Very
I like
little?
I like that. I love that. I wish more people thought that way, because I think a lot of people think 90% and 10% is the rest of it. So, what percent or like when we look at self carriage, how would you define self carriage then?
I think it's something so exquisite we rarely see it. It's a horse that's able to take care of its own body balance. So a horse could be in a lower level frame. So that would be like his poll and his withers are at the same height. So it's kind of a horizontal balance in relationship to the ground. They could be in that elevation and be in self carriage, in my opinion. So, meaning their back is lifted, their haunches are a little bit coiled under, and they step with engagement of the hind legs, like the hind hoof lands under the rider when it lands. It doesn't just pedal up and down underneath his hips. That would be and they're able to move in rhythm. That would be self carriage. And then at the higher levels, we would define it with those same parameters, but also the horse is in a more uphill balance appropriate to its conformation. That's the tricky bit with Western dressage, because if you're riding a stock horse that is naturally conformationally downhill, we're not going to bring his poll up like a saddlebred just to meet some aesthetic ideal. So self carriage for that horse might be that his poll is just a tiny bit above level with his withers, depending if he's, super downhill.
Mm-hmm. So I like and agree with everything that you just said. That also brings about another question for me. So, like, I don't see how what you just described as self carriage being a horse that takes responsibility for balancing their own body. I don't see how that's achievable until we have lost contact, because we have to get out of the horse's way that last little bit before self carriage, not helped carriage, can be achieved. And I feel like I don't know the timeline, but I feel like that is where classical dressage and modern dressage differed. Because when you do watch the videos of Nuno and his contemporaries,
Yeah.
they are riding on a slack rein, or not like drooping slack, but they're not in contact really. They're close to contact, but they're a little behind it. They could get to it in a couple of inches, but they're not staying there. So the horse has the opportunity to exhibit self carriage. When we never give the horse that opportunity, I don't think we can get there. It's like the training wheels are still on the whole time. So do you feel like, if you agree with that, do you feel like the lack of understanding of what contact should be, and sort of the weaning off process that should, well, assuming we have reached an appropriate level in training that we're ready to wean off of it, do you think that has an effect on the breakdown of some of these horses?
Oh, absolutely, because we haven't even yet talked about the fact that a horse can be frozen in a particular posture because his muscles are so contracted and dehydrated and shortened, and the fascia has actually cinched down like a tight sock. Some people mistake that for self-carriage. I see that all the time. You see these, I don't want to call out any breeds, but you see some of the more higher, high strung breeds, let's say thoroughbred off the track or something like that, that's been held in a bunch and lunged in all these restrictive side reins and draw reins and the whole nine. And you'll see those horses moving around with slack in the reins, and their shape of their neck resembles, a seahorse or a crochet hook. That's not self-carriage. That horse's body is stuck in a frame. But a lot of times that can be mistaken for false lightness, right? The rider will be like, my horse totally listens to my seat. He doesn't need any rein contact. And they're misinterpreting the fact that his body is so rigidly locked. So we could talk about self-carriage forever and not, and still be splitting hairs, I guess. But I also want to add that, like, to reference the Nuno Oliveira videos that you referenced, the horse, when it's correctly in self-carriage, should always have the appearance that it can and would willingly lengthen its neck. I didn't say lower, but lengthen, like its forehead could, advance forward at any second you asked it to. And that differentiates the example I just gave of a horse that's contracted and stuck in its neck. Actually, I was listening to one of your podcasts the other day, and you were talking about getting horses behind the bit and how hard it is to fix. And I was like, yeah, why don't more people talk about it? It is so hard to fix. And I was going to ask you a question. Percentage wise, the number of horses you work with, not ones you're starting, but ones that have already been under saddle for a while, what percentage of them are behind the bit versus one that have issues of being like above the bit or don't know anything about the bit in your world?
So I ride a pretty wide variety of horses, and I would say that is absolutely dependent upon the discipline the particular horse was in. So for instance, if it's reining horses, 100% of them. I think, and here's another weird thing about reining horses. They are, I cannot think of a single exception to this. Every reining horse I have ever stepped on has been as stiff as a board. Absolutely no lateral bend in them whatsoever. But their vertical flexion, it's like a hinge. I mean, they're so ready to come back and so light on that, it's not even funny, to a degree that's not good. I mean, there are other, like, I ride a decent number of rodeo horses too, and those horses don't have a problem with coming behind the vertical. They're a little on the other end of that spectrum. So it does depend. I also tend to find, like, whenever you have those certain events where everyone is guilty of it, like reining, but most of the time when I see horses that are from an event, I wouldn't really expect that. It's usually really green trainers or amateurs training their own horse that are the ones that do it. And I think it's like you've just described. They've done sidelines or some sort of bidding rig or something. And I'm not a fan of that stuff, but kind of my general rule is if you use that for like 3 days, 5 or 10 minutes a day in the round pen and then throw it away, then you might have broken the ice a little but didn't really do much damage. But if you do that habitually every day for 30 minutes for 6 months, then the ship has sailed. So those are the ones that are just about impossible to fix. And one thing I wanted to just jump back to what you were saying, the way you were describing it, I absolutely loved. You were talking about dehydration of the muscle and tightening of the fascia and all. What you're describing there is really a man-made scar. That's essentially, we have done scar tissue in the neck, and in order to rehab it, we have to break all of that loose, just like you would have to do if you're breaking up scar tissue in a muscle from some sort of trauma or something. So let's put that mental image in some of the minds of people doing this crap. Maybe they'll quit.
I'd love to. The other thing I remind people is, because the horse is a flight animal, Their muscles are not designed to hold an isometric muscle contraction. They're not designed to do that, right? They're designed to either be in motion or to be still and not moving. So to put a muscle into a shape and hold it in the same way if a human did a plank hold or they did a chin up and held the upright position, you know how much pressure that builds up on your nerve fibers. Those isometric muscle contractions are very metabolically taxing. When we ask a horse to keep his neck in a held position, which is what most people do, at least most English riders, when they climb aboard and they pick up the reins and they, trot around for the next 20 minutes, the horse builds up a significant amount of metabolic waste in the muscles until they are conditioned to withstand that duration of isometric muscular contraction. Unless you're stopping and giving your horse a lot of stretch breaks, which I find that most people don't, they just lose track of time. So to get back to your point on how long does it take to get to self-carriage, it's a journey. It's a journey and it's horse dependent. And these are some of the reasons why. There's some of the reasons I care deeply about. It's like you can't forget about physiology. It doesn't go away. It's there. The horse might not complain in ways that you're recognizing, but you should recognize it.
Well, I think they do complain. I mean, when you have a horse that fully expects that for the next 45 minutes, all I'm going to do is build up lactic acid until I'm a solid cramp, I wonder why he pins his ears when you go to get on, I mean, the anticipatory signs there are just, and that's some of the stuff I almost hate the word normalized, but there are a lot of cases where we have normalized body language that is screaming to us that there's a problem. And yet we say, oh, that's just how he is, or whatever. Well, he shouldn't just be that way. That's there's a blaze orange billboard that is. I think like just to keep hitting the self-carriage nail on the head, like the way that I would approach that with a horse is I'm gonna use my reins and my body and everything to put him in the position or closer to the position that I want. And then I might hold him there for a second and then I'll let go. And a green horse is going to immediately fall out of balance. And then I'm going to return him to balance. And we're going to do that seesaw back and forth forever until he holds it for a second. And then he holds it for 2 seconds. And then he holds it for 3 seconds. But to me, if I'm not ever letting go of him, I'm never going to get there. So I wish that more people that were training horses like this realize that 45 seconds held in a single posture that's an impossibility. I mean, you should be half a circle and then, stretch him some way or whatever until you eventually build up to. But that's one of those things I think is normalized. I know there was.
I think you're right. I like the way you just I love the way you just described it. That's the way it happens. I run into so many people who are just learning how to help their horse move better. And they know kind of that they want the neck to be in a specific place. And that might take a little bit of time. I don't know. I guess in their mind, they think it's going to take 5 minutes, and then they'll be all frustrated. I'll see them the next day and they'll be like, well, Johnny or whatever the horse's name is, he'd stretch his neck out, pretty well for like, I don't know, 10 strides. And then it would just shoot back up in the air. And then he'd get it again for a few minutes, but then it was gone again. And I'm just nodding going, like, what's the problem? Like, yeah, it sounds like you're on the right track. This is a process, but they almost think that, Johnny's faulty, or maybe they missed a secret cue or something. And it's like, no, this doesn't happen with the paint of a brush, And
maybe everybody should be required to take a ballet lesson and hold the little bar, and then they say, okay, now pick your leg up as high as you can and hold it for 45 seconds. And then you get a little appreciation of what that horse has been trying to do for the last 3 months, and maybe you cut him a little slack. I don't know. Well, what sorts of things do you look for when you're warming a horse up? Like, would you take us through, let's not say necessarily a horse that you're rehabbing or anything, but let's say you kind of have not a blank slate, but an unproblemed, physically unproblemed horse, what would be maybe a typical 20-minute warm-up routine for you?
So I always walk them for 10 minutes, and that sometimes is in hand or it's under saddle, but all the studies show between 8 and 12 minutes is how long a horse needs to walk to get the synovial fluids thinned out and lubricating the joints so that the subchondral bone and the cartilage doesn't take the concussive forces of movement. So I tear my hair out when people bring their horse into the arena and they're trotting within three minutes. I mean, Lord knows I definitely did that in my early years until I learned more about this stuff. So I always walk for 10 minutes, and it depends on the horse. Sometimes that'll be on a totally loose long rein. If it's a more advanced horse, a few minutes will be on a loose rein, and then I might pick up the reins and continue walking, but doing some lateral steps or pattern, walking different patterns, that kind of thing. And then depending on the plan for that day, like if we're going to have a pretty hardy workout, I will do a pretty hard warm up. So the harder your workout, the harder your warm up needs to be to actually deliver the oxygen and blood to the muscles. So if I'm going to do, let's say, a gallop session that day or some cavaletti or something like that, then I would do a lot of gait transitions, speed changes within the gaits. Usually the horse is just in a horizontal frame at that point, what I call the working frame. So it's not, uphill and in self-carriage like we talked about. It's more just a horizontal body balance. Let's just get things moving. I'm a big fan of trot canter transitions, as I said, and a little bit of lateral work, but nothing too nitpicky, just really warming up the temperature and pliability of the muscles. And just checking in with the horse, see how his energy level is. Is he tracking evenly on both sides? How's the rhythm? Is he focused and listening? All that stuff.
Now you see, I love the way that you said that, and one of my thoughts on horsemanship is that good horsemen always recognize each other regardless of the discipline. I wouldn't describe what I do to warm a horse up a damn bit differently than you just did, and I've got a very different aim typically, but it's all the same sort of stuff. I'm going to be more intense on certain days when I'm going to be more intense. I do way more walking than I used to. I actually do I don't do it immediately, but I do a lot more long trotting now than I do loping. I find that's actually made a significant difference in my horse's soundness. I think the long trot stretches them more, and I love to get the long trot where the horse gets really level and stretching their head out, not necessarily a long and low posture, but just their cover and ground,
Okay.
Gets them just real loose, and that's kind of one of my favorite exercises for warming up. But see, I like that. I think most people would imagine that a dressage trainer and a cow horse guy wouldn't have a whole lot in common, but I think there's an awful lot in common there. I really do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope so, but it's funny because I just did a talk about warm up with Patrick King, and I have changed how I warm up because when I was a in-house dressage trainer for other people in the past, there was an expectation that I would bring the horse out of the barn and basically start doing quote unquote dressage right off the bat, that the horse wasn't allowed to be in a long frame or to just move around. It needed to be doing something very specific, like movements, like shoulder in, like, half pass right off the bat. And the idea in their world was, well, you only want to warm up the muscles that you're going to use, right? You don't want to let your horse do a long trot because heaven forbid, what if he's a little bit on the forehand? The forehand, the evil word. And I, as a young trainer, of course, wanted to please everybody. So I would go about it that way. And my horses got stiffer and stiffer and stiffer, as you can imagine. And then when I started studying equine exercise physiology, I learned, are you people crazy? This idea of warming up the muscles you're going to use, for one, all you do when you pick up your reins and start doing your patterns or your maneuvers, whatever they are, is you activate the gymnastic muscle system. Well, guess what? The nerves are not in the gymnastic muscle system. They're in the postural muscles. So if you don't have a warm-up that just prioritizes good, healthy, rhythmic, easy movement, now easy, I mean not restricted, not forced, those nerves signals get diminished over time. And it's just like human athletes who might look kind of fit on the outside, but they have all these physical ailments. I mean, we all know the triathlete who's constantly like, oh, I got this ailment and that ailment, because the postural system's not activated. And so blood flow, oxygen delivery to the muscles at large is what matters. From there, you can go do whatever you want to do after the warm up. But God, again, I think it's just a matter of people being stuck in their little corrals. I think there should be less difference between the disciplines, as you just described, in terms of this warm up anyway.
Yeah, we're all riding horses and they all have four legs. How different can it really be, right? What in your mind, like, would that warm up have to involve a person wasting their valuable time, or how do you feel about walkers, or I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but the walkers that you don't tie a horse to, but they have like the panels, but it gets the horses moving around. Is that going to be sufficient in your mind if you put them in there for 15 minutes of walking around the circle of that thing, or does it need to be some changing around
No, that'll be sufficient for the joint fluid for sure. It doesn't deliver because they're not trotting and cantering in there, it doesn't deliver the blood and oxygen. You need a certain amount of force for that to happen, and you also need to raise the temperature of the muscles. So that would involve getting the heart rate up to, at least 120, which most horses are not going to walk at that. So, but if people are not going to come out, or they know they don't like to walk their horse because it's boring or whatever, then yeah, definitely use the hot walker, use the Euro sizer I think you're describing. Use a friend who wants to hack your horse for 10 minutes, if you find it boring, and I get it. Sitting on a horse walking around is, for some people, not a great use of their time, but just make sure it happens somehow.
Yeah, when I was 25, you couldn't have paid me enough money to just walk every horse around for 10 minutes.
No way. No.
And the older I get, the more. I was saying this at a place I spoke at not long ago. I could design a course with 3 obstacles that involved walking that would be so complex no human and horse on the planet could do it perfectly. There is so much more work, technical work, to be done at the walk than most people possibly realize. And so if you're just walking around, there is a hell of a lot of finding the timing of the feet and how to go from a left-hand circle to a right-hand circle smoothly without tripping the horse up. And there are all kinds of things you can productively be doing to sharpen your skills as a rider during that 10-minute break. Playing with contact, right? How can I ride that line and have my rein not bouncing, or my horse feeling 5 pounds 1 pound, 5 pounds 1 pound? There are lots of little skills you could be working on to make that 10 minutes productive as hell. So do it, people, do it.
That's right. You heard it here.
Yeah, I think it's time to break out our sponsor for the episode, Jec. And as you may or may not know, we always try to tailor our sponsor to the guests, so we found a very special one for you. Our sponsor for this episode is Tom's of Texas. As with nearly everything in the horse business, it's universally accepted that if there are only 2 things that the equine industry lacks, they are testosterone and organ meats, or Tom's. Tom's of Texas is here to help. An environmentally conscious company that doesn't believe in waste. We're taking the testicles of all those old geldings in the equine industry and squeezing out all the testosterone we can. We've recently supplied such icons as the Liver King and the Mountain from Game of Thrones. How you use it is your business, not ours and not the government's. Equally underrepresented in the horse world are organ meats. Just imagine how much more performance you could squeeze out of Old Thunder if he was getting high-density nutrition like organ meats instead of that after-ride cookie. Just switch to our molasses-flavored sweetbreads, and that cholesterol will keep Old Thunder from getting so wound up. You've never seen a fat guy full of sweetbread running anywhere. Do you have one that lacks a little heart? We can put some heart right back in him. How about intestinal fortitude? Never enough guts and always too many gut problems. Our intestinal fortitude booster is made with real intestines. You can't get better than real intestines, let me tell you. And none of those Chinese cat intestines either. These are genuine plumbing lines from a former horse of the USA. What about lameness prevention? We're so glad you asked. If your old Thunder's having some suspensory or deep digital flexor tendon problems, what better way to help him heal than powdered tendons and ligaments top dressed on his feed? All the building blocks are there and already in tendon and ligament form to boot. We're saving you money. If you're not winning on your horse, it's probably not a training problem. You need testosterone and organ meats, and more products coming soon. Tom's of Texas, environmentally conscious, GMO and gluten-free. Remember, your horse hasn't really had a meal unless there's meat. And absolutely everything is improved with way more testosterone. Dr. Tom Lecter, founder of Tom's of Texas, thanks you for your business and reminds you that the U.S. markets are just about open for horse meat again. When they do, remember that Tom's of Texas, and we'll make sure that you two can have an old friend for dinner. Tom's of Texas. It's awful, not awful. 25% off your next order if you convert a vegan.
How did you read that with a straight face?
I've had to do it about 25 times before I knew I could get through it.
Sure.
Oh, we also want to do a shout out to one of our former sponsors, the Alec Baldwin School of Firearm Safety. We want everyone to know publicly that we stand behind Alec Baldwin because there's no way in hell we'd stand in front of him. All right. That concludes our sponsorship for this episode. So we've paid the bills. I feel better now.
You should have told your sponsor I'm not a big fan of supplements. You hit a lot of buttons there.
See, I'm good at this. I'm telling you, it's like a savant thing I've got going on with these sponsorships. All right, so back to reality. What would be some thoughts that you would have on bringing a horse back into work? So I have a Facebook group called Bits, Spurs, and Good Sense, and whenever I'm going to interview a guest like yourself, I kind of always ask the group if they have some questions that they would like for me to ask you, and this one was probably asked 3 or 4 times, some derivation of bringing a horse back into work. And one was a specific on that, a horse that is coming back from a bout of laminitis. So what are your thoughts?
Okay. So in terms of bringing a horse back into work, it's always helpful to know how long they've been off, because while it is true that horses maintain their fitness longer than humans do, it's not factual that they hold on to it a lot longer than humans do. So measurable fitness fitness losses can be measured at 4 weeks of no exercise. Now, in this case, no exercise is fewer than 3 training sessions a week. So if your horse has been exercised, 2 or fewer times a week for more than 4 weeks, they've lost some degree of fitness. Now, it does erode somewhat slowly, but by the time you get to 12 weeks, the horse is considered, at a physiological level, completely unfit. And increasingly, as we study conditioning, and I want to thank you, Daniel, for in one of your podcasts, you acknowledged that a lot of the studies that we have come out of the racing industry. So I know that it's a controversial world for sure, but a lot of our information on fitness does come from the racing industry. And what they've been able to show is that even if Sparky or Thunder was very fit and then had 12 weeks off, they don't just hit a switch and get that fitness back really quickly. We used to think they did. And I think the reason is because they were studying horses that had better aerobic metabolisms, like Arabians and thoroughbreds, when they did those studies. So those horses automatically just become fitter faster than most of the general population. So let's say the horse with laminitis has been off for, I'm going to guess, probably a couple months, because laminitis is kind of a gnarly deal. You want to start with, obviously walking in your case, probably on as firm ground as the horse will tolerate. Softer surfaces tend to exacerbate the soreness in the foot. So, and also firm ground, if the horse has been really sedentary, firm ground is better for re-recruiting all the proprioceptors that help activate the postural system. So, lots of multiple sessions throughout the day walking on firm ground. And then you start to progressively build up. So I do have on my website conditioning programs if you need more help, but just generally speaking, you would start with 20 minutes a day of walking. And then I'm a big fan of multiple sessions. If you can do that a couple times a day, it's even better. And then you're going to start adding postural exercises. So you're just walking and doing postural exercises. So what are postural exercises? So things like pelvic tucks, walking over ground pulls, a little bit of bending, you can do some serpentining in hand, that sort of thing that gets the horse sort of organizing his body. And then you can gradually add back in the trotting and a little bit of canter as the horse tells you. I think they're really good at telling us when they are ready for more. The hard part about when you've had a horse that has a situation like you're describing, we can be so worried about making it worse that we can do them a disservice by holding back and being worried that we're going to break something. And then, fitness is protective, and I like to remind people of that. Fitness is protective. So if you can guide this horse back to fitness, unless the horse is giving you really overt signs that today's not the day, don't push too much. But the thing too about rebuilding is it won't be linear. So there might be some days where it seems like you have a setback, especially with a laminitic kind of situation. The horse might be a little bit more sore. That doesn't mean what your overall conditioning program is not working. It just means they had to set, a little inflammatory response that day. They might be totally different the next day. So when you're in a conditioning program, don't throw in the towel based on one day's response. I like to remind people of that too. I know it's simple, but when your own horse is involved and they look like they're hurting, it can be hard to see the forest through the trees. So hopefully sort of answered your question.
No, I think that was very good. I was going to also ask, when you mentioned the protective, like let's say that I have a horse that is going to be feeling good. He's been in a stall for a while because of some injury or whatever, and I need to turn him out, but this is fixing to be a bucking, farting, running kind of a thing. Is that something to allow? Not allow? It depends.
My ideal situation would be to get the 10 minutes of controlled walking in first, and then if he needs to blow a gasket, let him blow a gasket. Now, increasingly, thankfully, vets are leaning away from stall rest because it's usually counterproductive, but also it's so outdated. Nowadays we like the same with humans. We know that a horse benefits not necessarily from being locked down and put in bubble wrap, but from getting the right physical therapy and mobility drills. So you might limit their exercise, but hopefully gone will soon be the days of just locking them in, locking them up and getting them all mentally stressed out.
Yeah.
So,
would you like your suspensory tear healing with a side of ulcers or without a side of ulcers?
right. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Okay. As far as lameness diagnostics, and I know you're not a veterinarian, and that word diagnose has legal ramifications, but you are a person who routinely rehabilitates horses and understands the physiology there better than most. Is there a particular path of diagnostics that you prefer? Or I know it somewhat depends upon the particular soundness issue we're having, but like do you I can say one of the most productive people that I ever have known within my horse career at finding soundness problems in horses was a chiropractor. And
Yeah.
that guy could put hands on a horse and use acupressure on buttons, and he would find stuff, way before anybody else could. Now, I've never met his equal, so I'm not saying all chiropractors are capable of that, but is there a particular pathway that you prefer, or not really?
That's really interesting. that you mentioned that. I mean, to answer your first question, I just don't think we have yet. I think we're still learning about lameness. I don't think we have an ideal. I mean, I shouldn't say that too generally. I'm sure there are some sports vets out there who I haven't met yet who have a good system. I think the way things are typically approached with like, well, let's trot him up and down the driveway, let's flex his hind limbs a little bit, see if that makes things worse, and then like let's start nerve blocking things. I think that's a pretty limited scope. That said, I didn't write the vet books. It's not like I've got it like, a better program. But I will say I do like when the horse is observed on different surfaces moving. I do like when they're observed online, as well as if it's appropriate for them to be ridden, because a lot of times it is the riding or training that is a major factor in why they're lame. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle. Now, that said, obviously, if your horse is three-legged lame, we're not going to put a saddle on and ride him. But I like when it can be included if it's a subtle lameness or a mysterious lameness that seems to like move around the body and you can't really put your finger on it.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I was interested by what you said though was I was working with a European trainer. This is many years ago, and he was a vet, had been a vet. And first of all, he said, "What is with you Americans and your injections? Why are you people injecting everything?" And I was like, "Thank God I'm not crazy," because I often ask myself, "What is with all these injections going on?" But that's a separate tangent. He said, in lameness exams, why do your vets here start blocking out the extremities? He's like, in Europe, when we diagnose. Now, again, this was many years ago. It may be different, but it's something that stuck with me because it was interesting. He said, if and when we're going to start blocking during a lameness exam, we start higher up. So I think maybe he meant like more kind of the axial skeleton, not down at the feet and then working up from the lower limbs, which is how I typically see it done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can answer that for you. If you numb them from, say, the elbow down, then you have no diagnostic ability to identify what joint or area of the leg is the problem. You just know it's somewhere south of that because you've killed everything south of there. So
Yeah.
they start like at coffin joint, and then fetlock, and then up to the high cannon and so forth. So like if you blocked out the coffin and nothing happened, and then the pastern and nothing happened, and then you get to the knee and all of a sudden they're not lame, it's somewhere around the knee. If you started at the elbow, all you know is it's below the elbow. So it's diagnostically unhelpful to do it that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I would agree with you where well, I'm not a diagnostician either. And well, one of the things I'll say is that there are varying degrees of competence among veterinarians, just like there are varying degrees of competence among trainers. So there are some vets that are really, really good at lameness, and there are some vets that do lameness as a part of their job. And I'll leave it at that. But I kind of always find, and when we get to the nerve blocks, we already are acknowledging we've missed some stuff and we don't really know what's going on here. And now we're kind of throwing darts at a dartboard. So sometimes that's what you have to do. I mean, I'm sure you've seen your share of those roaming lamenesses that winds up being compensatory, and where we're seeing that has nothing to do with the origination of where it came from when we eventually find it. So I mean, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But
yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't envy these vets at all. I mean, I don't envy them, and increasingly, there's this pressure for these field vets to come up with a diagnosis. I mean, I understand you're worried, your horse is dead lame, you feel terrible, it's anxiety inducing, you want to know what the problem is, and a lot of times they'll poke and prod and try to find something just to, because there needs to be an answer. But in reality, sometimes the answer doesn't reveal itself for days or longer, as you know. So that's why I say it's unenviable for me to be in their position to come up with a diagnosis.
For sure. Well, one of the other things I'll say about that is you had touched on it earlier, and this is a touchy subject, but I think that people get a little too squeamish around the topic of pain, and all pain really is a data point. And I don't know if you've ever had any sorts of surgeries or physical ailments where you had to go through physical therapy, but often the healing process from the problem involves more pain than the problem ever did. So if you can't handle putting a horse through a little bit of pain, you don't have a chance at rehabbing some of this stuff, because they're going to have to, break fascia and scar tissue to regain mobility sometimes. And there's just no way forward through a lot of this stuff without some discomfort. And I think as a general rule, people don't have any kind of tolerance for pain anymore. This is a little off topic, but it was very nearly written into law a few years ago to change the legal definition of cruelty to any act that could, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but any act that could foreseeably be expected to cause pain to an animal. And on its surface, that sounds good, but in reality, now a vet can't give one a shot, and a farrier can't test for a hoof abscess, and you can't move a foundered horse out of the stall because he's going to hurt when he walks. So I think we focus on that incorrectly sometimes, and I think it's really the wrong metric. I mean, of course, we want the animal to be comfortable, but pain in and of itself is merely information. That's really all that it is. So anyway, okay, I talked for a long time there. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's an interesting topic, and because horses most of them are really good at hiding pain. That's how they survive. And so when we decide that we are reading their pain a certain way, or their pain is being exhibited to a level that's unacceptable, I have to remind people, well, don't kid yourself that, except for this day that Thunder is a little bit, sore-footed, that all the other days that horse never experiences pain. Don't kid yourself. That's not the reality. They experience pain in all kinds of situations. And again, I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it's just the real world. Sometimes they bring each other pain. They kick each other. They play the bitey face game a little too hard. But I have seen a trend, I think, towards rehab, physical rehab, being used somewhat synonymously with pain management. And because a lot of times when people contact me for a conditioning plan for their horse that has had some ailment and they're trying to recondition it, I'll say, okay, well, what have you done to date? And typically they'll say, well, his rehab plan has included the following. And usually it's just a list of like therapies and medicines and shots and things like that. It's not anything having to do with training movement back into the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is really interesting. Like, rehabilitation to me means we're getting the horse's body back to a state where it's comfortable and able and to live life, to move, to carry the horse around. And I think certainly we need to manage their pain, but that's not the one thing we should fix our mind on when you have a horse like your person that had the laminitic condition. I mean, laminitis horses, sometimes they're painful for me to even try to walk from point A to point B. It's like, oh my God, that looks like it hurts so bad. And many of those horses get through it fine when they get their diet changed and everything sorted out. And then you got to train normal movement back into them. We can't just show up every day and be like, oh, how's the pain? Do I need to give them something for the pain? It's like we need to start training movement back in. And I don't hear enough of that being talked about, maybe because we're still learning. And that's part of what I'm hoping to do with the 55 Corrective Exercises book. And then my next book coming out next year is I'm hoping to help, get more thoughts heading in this direction about training good movement back into a compromised situation.
Sure. Well, why don't you, since we're talking about the rehabilitation and the corrective movement stuff, like, it's pretty easy for me to see how a laminitic horse that's been walking in a certain way, kind of the opposite of tiptoeing around, I guess, they have weakened certain muscles, strengthened other muscles, and now we've got the imbalance problem, and we have to reverse that to get them moving correctly again. For for the average layman, what's involved in that? Like in terms of if I have 4 cavalettis and a lunge line, can I do 90% of what might need to be done, or is there more specialized equipment
Pretty much.
involved, or kind of what's the course
I
there?
I think you could do a lot with 4 cavalettis and a lunge line. Absolutely, yeah. So the place I typically start, I mean, it's always helpful to see a video, but the place I typically start with people is helping the horse awaken its back. I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but get its back muscles turned back on again, because there's so much good evidence that shows that horses' back muscles, I think humans are the same too, I believe, but I don't know that for sure, that our supporting back muscles, the little ones between the vertebrae, they switch off in the case of trauma. So whether that's acute trauma or chronic trauma, but within, like, let's say a horse has a slip or an accident or something, within 4 days of that incident, the back muscles they've measured just stop being active. Not the long back muscle, because anytime the horse walks, that one activates, but the spinal stabilizers.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't just switch back on when you've resolved the pain. It'd be great if they did, but they don't. And so just like us, we want to put their body through a relaxed sequence of movements that sets about doing that job. Now, to be clear, this is different than in like an aerobic conditioning program, right? We're not talking about getting the horse quote unquote fit at a cardiovascular level right now. We're talking about just getting his body back to a healthy state. So walking over ground poles is an awesome one, except for in the case of like some hoof injuries that are so severe the horse shouldn't be doing any kind of, unstable walking like that. But I prescribe ground poles a lot, as well as, a lot of strategic backing up and backing on different surfaces. Your pavement, grass. Yeah, right.
Preach. Absolutely.
It's so good and so simple. And that's what these things really should be: simple. If and when it's appropriate, I do a lot of like turns on the forehands, if the footing is good, because it's important for the hoof to be able to rotate down into the soil, so you're not torquing the lower limb in these situations, and these kinds of things. And then after usually 4 to 6 weeks of postural kind of exercises like that, which is mostly just walk and some of these things we're talking about, then we would move towards more cardiovascular conditioning after that.
Well, so you brought up the hoof. To me, that is always one of the things when I see the old-fashioned heel caulk type shoes. That
Oh,
to
yeah.
me is one of those, like, hey, let's just not have a sound horse in 5 years. Let's throw this on there, just completely immobilize the hoof from being able to twist around and slip or whatever. Let's just twist that sucker right off of there. Huh? Have you had similar experiences?
It's amazing to me, some of the stuff they put on horses' feet. I mean, it's amazing.
I don't mind like the replaceable studs and stuff where you could adjust here and there, but the 24/7 can't twist his foot like that. I mean, what else is that a recipe for?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll say here. So we've talked a little bit. I certainly don't have the experience with this that you have, but one of those pet peeves of mine, I think, especially in the Western world, and even worse, especially in the performance and horsemanship parts of that, I think these dang 13-foot lead ropes on a halter and circle after circle after circle and disengaging the hindquarters, I think that has crippled more horses than maybe anything else. I really believe, like, and my other aspect of that is these fitted sail coats that we get, when they fit them up as yearlings to put them through the big sails and all.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That means they're going to go in a round pen and just do mindless circle after mindless circle for 20 minutes every day for 2 months. And to me, those circles and those repetitive stress injuries, and even more exacerbated by the halter lunging on the smaller and smaller circle, I really believe that's responsible for a great many of the horses that we have that break down. Like I know as I've improved as a rider, I still use the circle as a foundation of training, but I can get a really good circle on my horses way faster. And once I get it on, we move on. I don't have to just drive it into the ground for 6 months to get it on there anymore. And then we go to straight lines and stuff. And that seems to me to have made a pretty significant improvement in the soundness of the horses. Do you have any?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I was just watching some research be presented last week on auxiliary aids, or these lunging rigging systems, side reins, Pessoa rigs, etc., on horses. And it was somebody in England who had done some testing, so using muscle sensors and all the technologies they have nowadays, thermographic cameras and whatnot, to measure the forces in the horse's body with these devices and whether or not they actually do the things they're supposed to do, right? And it was fascinating because it turns out, like, no, they don't. But most vets in a rehab setting will send you home with these instructions to, use the Pessoa rigging system. And I don't want to knock on that system. I'm just using that as an example. But, use this. And this person made the very good point that vets don't often take into account when you're using those systems, you're on a circle, right? You're not running alongside your horse on straight lines. So they started studying the effect of circles on these horses, and the ground reaction force on the outside foot in particular was significantly higher. And hands down, didn't matter the size of the circle, 15-meter circle, 20-meter circle. It made the back muscles far more asymmetrical than straight line work. And I think of these poor horses that are on lunge circles ad nauseum, with people saying they're, getting the horse straighter or building its top line or whatever they think they're doing. And it's like, wait, we now have data that you're doing the opposite.
Well, to add to that, we also have the horse that is, by your definition, probably been out of work for 12 months or 12 weeks and is thus completely unfit. And now we put this rig on him and expect him to hold some posture that there's no way he can hold for 20 minutes. And so he's held in the posture by ropes, and then he gets fatigued and starts leaning into the ropes. And before long, he's pushing out of the posture that we're actually trying to get him into to strengthen, because he doesn't have that in, out, contract, flex, stretch mechanism working for him. So I'm right there with you. I'm not at all a fan of those. I've kind of, for a little while, been toying on the idea of doing a video of some of those rigs and just describing, if I were going to use this, I would use it this way and not that way, in hopes that maybe it'll save some people from overdoing it so much, because like you can do this for about 5 minutes or something, but if you try to do it for 30, you've long passed what his physical capability is, and you're heading in the other direction now.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, I had a question for you on being able to work your horse productively even when it might be too cold or too wet. So I guess like we're restricted to the barn aisle or something like that, but we can't go hack out in the country or something. So do you have, with some of those walking drills and all, do you have some thoughts on some easy, productive?
There is definitely, like, even when it's super cold, you can still walk, I'm guessing, unless it's, I don't know, minus 40 or something where you live. But again, just to reiterate, there's so much value in the walk physiologically, and a brisk walk, as I mentioned, keeps the heart rate. So brisk is like, if we're using US metrics, let's say you're going 3.5 miles per hour and you're walking, that for most horses is going to create a heart rate in the 90s, about 90 beats per minute. And that zone has been shown to maintain baseline fitness. So you're not going to build fitness, but you're going to maintain at least a little bit of fitness. Horses need to be activated at about 40% of their maximum heart rate for 25 or more minutes, 4 times a week, in order to maintain baseline fitness. So for most horses, it's breed dependent what their max heart rate would be, but 90 to 100 beats per minute will get you in that zone. So if you can walk briskly, you're keeping that heart rate where it needs to be, uninterrupted for 20, 25 minutes. That's going to be phenomenal. But then there's also plenty of what I call calisthenics or unmoving kinds of exercises you can do. So I just put a video on my YouTube channel of what I call step up, or some people have a pedestal or a box that you can work with. And if you use that exercise of stepping the front feet up and off the box or pedestal or whatever it is that you have in a slow rhythmic manner, it's really interesting to watch what happens with their shoulder muscles and their lower neck and their tongue and jaw. It's really cool. I usually do about 10 reps of that. Very beneficial exercise. If you don't have a box, you can do a single pull, stepping the front feet back and forth across the single pull. Kind of has a similar effect of bringing the scapula, sliding the scapula back and forth across the chest wall in a nice relaxed fashion. So those are some of my go-tos, as well as like a pelvic tuck. I always do tail pulls. I usually do about 3 of those a day. So good for the lower back, and also for the stifles. It's a good static exercise for stifle tone. Trying to think of some other quick ones that come to mind, like to your point in a barn aisle. Again, backing up. You can back up in a barn aisle. Pretty much back up anywhere.
What about carrot stretches? Do you do any of that type stuff?
I do, yeah. I do a lot of carrot stretches unless horses tend to get like really pushy and nippy. I've had a few in the past that just like start mugging you for carrots and it doesn't work. Now you can use a target and not use a carrot. But many horses are fine with the carrot stretches. I absolutely love them. So I try to vary them. Like every other day, I'll do the carrot stretch that comes around to the side and then maybe between the knees. And then like the following day, I'll go down to the outside of the front feet and then maybe raising the head up as high and out as it'll reach. So I rotate between, 5 or 6 carrot stretches to keep it novel. And then I also like to add, when I have one available, putting the horse on like a little gymnastic mat, so there's a little bit of squishiness. I mean, if you have the fancy physio pads that are super expensive, you can use those too, but I have the thrifty little kids gymnastic mat instead, and I do the carrot stretches while they're on that mat, and that's terrific for them, for proprioception, for postural muscles, for symmetry. They're usually pretty different side to side. Those are great things to do. And they're things you're probably going to neglect in your busier riding season, right? So this is actually a great time to do it. I always tell people winter can be a drag, or you can just embrace doing the things that you probably skip during the more fun riding times of the year.
I like that. When you were talking about the vertebrae stabilizer muscles in the back earlier, the carrot stretches was kind of what came to mind. I didn't want to interrupt you to throw that in and ask you about it. I haven't gotten myself into any of these mats or pads or anything, but you're maybe the third horseman that I respect that has mentioned that. So I may have to start playing with that a little bit. And it doesn't make any sense to me why that would have an effect. But when 3 people that I respect say it does, I'm certainly capable of missing something, so I need to investigate now.
I'd be curious your experience, because I always tell people, because they'll be like, why is my horse doing this on the mat? And I'll say, honestly, I can't tell you why, but you can't deny that they are having a huge release, right?
Uh-huh.
But I mean, sometimes similarly, I was doing something with a horse yesterday. I think I was doing step downs, which is an exercise I've seen done with dogs. And I thought, well, heck, I'm going to try this with the horses. Why not, right? So having his back feet up on the pedestal and just having him, well, I don't have a pedestal. I have like a 4-inch platform, and asking him to, go back and forth like that with his butt up in the air. And my God, this horse all of a sudden after the 3rd rep, like really lowered his neck and his eyelids rolled back. And I mean, he went into some state that I was like, well, I didn't see that coming, but that's pretty cool. And right now I can't explain it. I got to experiment a little more until I figure out what was going on. But I love stuff like that.
So I was going to ask you about this, because Deshaun was one of the others that had brought this up, and he was telling me about horses getting up on a pedestal. And in my mind, for whatever reason, I don't really see that working or stretching anything. But then, like you say, the results that you get from it are kind of neat. So I had just forwarded a link to him a couple of days ago of a teeter-totter, but it's kind of a rocking chair sort of a thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so
cool.
The horses
Yep.
on it, and I was wondering if we would expect a similar effect from that as like the pedestal, or if it's the step off with no support that is the difference, or what. So
I'd be interested in that. It almost now you have me really curious. I'm almost interested if that type of maneuver, a teeter totter, like if a horse would be tempted to use his gymnastic muscles too much to make it rock. I almost wonder if they take over, if you wouldn't get the same response. But it's probably horse dependent and how balanced they are. So, now my wheels are turning.
these are the things that keep us from getting bored. It's
True.
kind of like gym stuff. I mean, does it make any sense why you would touch a horse in random places annoyingly softly and it would give him these massive releases and stuff? No, it makes no damn sense whatsoever. Yet here it is right in front of my eyes. So I guess there's something to it, right? So you mentioned supplements a little bit ago. What are some thoughts that you have on nutrition and supplements? And I specifically wanted to ask you this, not really because of anything about you in particular, but I see a trend in horses that I am not a fan of, and that is in killing them with kindness. I think we have got a ton of body condition score 8s out there, and I think we have almost no people that realize that that's as unhealthy as a 3. And so do you like a fat horse or a leaner horse, or do you like making really expensive urine? What is your
No,
thoughts?
I like them. I like them lean. I like them lean, and I agree with you. And it's disheartening to hear that maybe this is nationwide, because I was hoping the trend was only in my neck of the woods.
Oh no,
Although with hay at $31 a bale, I don't know why anybody out here has fat horses, but we do, and I do believe that our visual has shifted such that I'll hear people say things like that horse is too skinny, and I'll say no, you actually can't even feel his ribs when you go put your hand on there. But the standard has almost shifted, but I was very pleased to hear that my vets are still like, nope, that's too fat. Like, if you want to take care of their joints, you got to keep them lean. You've got to, especially young horses, but any horse really, you've got to keep them lean. I'm not saying a rack of bones, but horses, in my observation, are first of all, they move better when they're not carrying an extra suitcase in their middle, but also they're just healthier. They're healthier. Their joints they have less joint problems, less arthritis if you keep them lean. So that's my rant on that. Supplements, oh my God. When I was a kid and my parents were trainers, I don't even remember there being supplements. I think if we ever put anything on the grain, it was just more molasses to make it taste better. You know what I mean? Like, I tear my hair out now at the thought of that. But there was none of this like customized packet of stuff you fed him. It just makes me it just makes me cringe. Especially the things, and I get it. People are trying to do right by their horse. They want him to feel good and have energy and have good immunity and etc. And it wouldn't be great if you could just feed all that stuff in there, but in my opinion, next to none of it works. And so I don't really do so. I feed salt from Redmond salt and bentonite clay, and that's it.
Well, I'm pretty well with you. I think a good balanced nutrition program is pretty much where you need to be, and most of the rest of it has very sketchy science behind it, and science is not really the right word there. Pseudoscience, maybe. And I think you're mostly making expensive urine, but I could be wrong. Who knows? I didn't think that having a horse stand on a rubber mat would be beneficial either. So I'm having trouble reading my handwriting. Oh, one thing I was gonna mention when we were talking about the fat horses. Are you familiar with the Texas A&M study from a few years ago on this?
Yes, yes.
So, where they slaughtered some horses just to look at them, and they found intramuscular fat, which is we would call marbling if we were talking about meat, in all of these performance horses, similar to that of feedlot cattle. So when we use the word obese, that's not hyperbole. They are that fat. And I think when you went to Europe, I know the the eyes are different over there, and I've heard some Americans recoil at some of the European horses where the hip bones are a little bit prominent. Maybe the backbone is rising a little more than anything we would see over here. When you were over there, do you see that, or not really?
Maybe a little bit, but I tell you, one of the reasons it's good for all of us to travel around and see different things is it's a good reminder that at the end of the day, horses are really darn adaptable. And there are, even though we think we have a lot of good answers, there's a lot of fine ways to keep horses. So when we were in Portugal last week, the horses there live in tiny box stalls. Some of these stalls are so tiny that they can't even lay down. Like there's not room for them to get down and get back up. And, they're all stallions and they're all in these tiny little stalls and they have a hard time getting hay. They also have been in a major drought for the last couple of years. And so they kind of feed whatever they have. And they were chopping up this not so great looking hay to make some kind of chaff out of it. And they were mixing it in a wheelbarrow with carrots. I mean, they're just using whatever they have. But I'll tell you, those horses are in good flesh and they have excellent energy and they work tremendously. But here's the more important thing, Daniel. There's 60 horses at this barn that I was at. You would walk down that stall aisle, not a single one of them had a stall vice. Not a single one of them had a sour look in its eye. They were nothing but soft-eyed, calm, well-adjusted horses. And it's just a reminder that a lot of times I think it's the spirit in which horses are kept. Obviously, they do get a ton of exercise, so it's not like they're only standing in a box stall forever and ever, but I think that's why it's important to travel. It's like, yeah, we have a lot of good ideas about things. And you know what? There's also different ways to do things. And let's look at the horse. Does he seem like he's suffering, honestly, or do they seem like they're thriving?
Yep. I agree with you. I do think we have a lot to learn. Well, not all of us, but our socialization of horses in America, I think, could improve quite a bit. The I want to keep him in a stall and wrap him in bubble wrap, and if I turn him loose with those other three horses, he might get kicked. And yeah, but he might degrade mentally when he's not turned out with those other three horses too.
Right. Yeah.
It's not as though there isn't a risk in the other direction either. With that that you just said, you'd mentioned how they're all stallions. Do you have any preference there among stallions, mares, geldings, or do you find that there's really that much difference between them, or what do you think about that?
I don't know that I have a preference. I've ridden great stallions, really great mares, and my own horse right now is a gelding. He's the first gelding I've owned, but he's pretty great too. So I don't know that I have a preference. I don't have enough skill handling stallions that if I had one that was a bit on the feistier side, I'm not sure I would do the most bang up job. I just haven't been around a lot of breeding stallions. I've ridden a lot, but that like outside of breeding season, that kind of thing. So, and it's next to impossible to find a boarding situation for a stallion, right? So,
yeah. Well, I'm kind of with you. I don't really find that mares are this way, like the pissy dominant makes you ask permission kind of a thing. I mean, I kind of take them all as individuals, and I've got 3 different mares here right now that if it wasn't for raising their tail and winking, I would never know when they come in heat. There's no difference, between now and then, when they're in, when they're not, and so forth. I've got geldings that are, well, I refer to my personal horse, Curly, as a very feminine gelding, because he tends to have that temperament that the mares are supposed to have, but here he is supposed to be this solid gelding that is dum-de-dum-de-dum, never changes day to day. So I always tell people, well, I don't ever advise people to own a stallion, but amongst the mares and the geldings, I always say just go for the individual, because it doesn't matter even if both of them are this way. If the one you have is the exception, you still have a problem. So judge the individual.
Right.
Okay, now I have a couple of dressage questions for you, just since I got you here. Halting square. How the hell do you train them to do that? Is that simpler than I'm imagining it is, or not? Is that Would I get on a schoolmaster and he would show how ignorant I really am immediately, or would he just take care of me there?
Well, your Western horses stop square, don't they?
I'm not really familiar with any event where they have to, not to the same degree like dressage. And in fact, like with cutting horses, I would actually train them not to do that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because if let's say the cow is on the left side and the horse stops, I do not want his hind feet to square up. He's going to bury his right hind in the sand, and he needs to hold it there and not move it, because that allows him to make the turn he's fixing to need to make. If he squares up, then he has to move again to reset his feet in order to make the turn. So he just cost us some time and some smoothness. So that's never been something I aimed to get done. But it's always kind of, I've thought, that is not something I would think on spending extra time doing. Yet I can totally see the utility of it if I'm judging an advanced rider, and now I can see that they purposefully rode off with a certain foot and had that kind of control to start the maneuver exactly as they wanted, or if they just asked the horse to walk forward and got a random step, that square halt tells on you. So,
well, a horse moving from his moving with more activity from his hindquarters and his forequarters, if he's in balance and you stop him, he will be square. If you lose the balance in the moment of the transition, then you'll end up with a, foot in 4 different corners, so to speak. But, if your horse is engaged in a trot and you sit down and stop, 9 times out of 10, he's going to be square. And then when you tell him that was a stellar job, then just like a lot of it just starts to become habit as much as anything.
You have, I'm licking and chewing over here on the other end of this. You've just turned a light on for me in my head. I've got a little exercise that I use at clinics, because a lot of times you're not riding with people that you've ever ridden with before, and you kind of need to know where everybody's at. And so this is my super secret evaluation exercise. I have everybody get in a semicircle around me, and I ask them to ride their horse forward 7 steps and stop on the 7th step, which in my world is critical. But everybody winds up with 7.5 or 6.5, and that half step is the horse trying to square up. And I have never allowed for that's just what they naturally want to do. I have always blamed it on the person not being able to stop the horse. But I guess the definition of what a stop is relative, because to me it's freezing your feet and not repositioning. But to y'all, it's ceasing forward motion and then getting square.
Yeah, exactly.
Which in my world is another half a step. So I'm going to have to now ponder that a little bit more deeply. That's what I love about it. I mean, walking is so much more complicated than people give it credit for, including a guy that's been pondering it for 30 years and has now just learned something about it. Isn't that wonderful? All right. Well, Jec, I'm about out of questions. Is there anything that you wanted? Let's talk about your online courses a little bit. Why don't you tell us what you have on there? You already talked about, I think, the 30 days to bring your horse back into work.
Yeah, so there's a 30-day core fitness, what I call core fitness for horses. But obviously, with horses, you can't isolate muscles. So it's just kind of a catchy title more than anything. It is all walking and corrective exercise type work. So very suitable for people that are in wintry climates right now, or people with senior horses or mobility restrictions for one reason or another. That's been out for a few years. People like it. It's really helpful. It just kind of tells you what to do every day and for how long. And then I have a ground pole course on there. I'm rabid about ground poles. I am a huge fan of their benefit, both from like a therapy restoring movement perspective and also from a reaching a higher level of performance perspective. They're just so awesome. So there's a course on there with different exercises progressively for walk, trot, and canter over the course of a month. That's really fun. And then I have on my website, I have a stifle. I was getting a lot of inquiries about stifle issues in the past couple of years. And so I was writing these conditioning plans for people. And I thought, God, instead of, continuing to write these plans, I'll just make it available to everybody. So that's on there for a download. That's a digital download. And then, like I say, I've got a new book coming out next year, and that'll be specific workouts. So not single standalone exercises, but workouts showing you how to sequence them, how long to do things. Because I find a lot of times with fitness programs, and in my world, everything's a fitness program. Every time you're riding your horse, you're either helping or hindering his fitness. The dosage is a real issue. Like a lot of times people don't know how long to do a thing, especially if they're learning a skill. So let's say you read this magazine article and you're like, oh, that's a cool exercise. I'm going to go do that with my horse and improve its fitness. Well, if you do it too long or too short, you don't reach the gains that you want to reach. So dosage, teaching people more about how long to do things is critical. So that's one thing this new book will do that I'm psyched about.
I like that. Just in general, like, would you say, do you work a horse more than an hour very often, or is that sort of an outer limit for you?
It depends on the horse. So let's say it's a mature horse that's been in a regular training routine, like a 10-year-old horse. And yeah, I routinely will work it longer than an hour, but that would only come once or twice a week. I do like there to be at least one session a week that is longer than 1 hour because you're developing different aerobic capacities. So when you go past like the 45-minute mark, then you start recruiting fatigue buffering capabilities and also aerobic enzymes, those sorts of things, just for low intensity exercise that becomes important. However, if you always do everything at the same length of time, you have diminishing returns. So there are days in the week where I work the horse shorter, like 35 minutes. And then some sessions are 45. And then at least one session will be longer than an hour. And that's a really balanced program. So they're able to give them the variety of stimulus they need. But I find that's another place that really well-intentioned people go wrong. Is adult amateurs, let's say they only have 45 minutes after work, and they always sort of work their horse for 45 minutes, and the horse actually loses fitness. Humans are the same. If you do the same thing at the same rate of speed all the time, the body becomes more efficient, which means you're recruiting fewer muscle fibers.
The challenge isn't there anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I am curious. Like, I know you're a runner yourself, and I know that sort of stuff has been in the running world for a while. Like, if you're training for a triathlon, you don't run 8 miles every day. You're 6 miles one day, 12 miles the next, and so forth. Is that kind of where that catalyst came from for you for this, or does this have?
So, well, I like to say I'm my own guinea pig, but the two have evolved at the same time. Like my passion for running and long distance biking has kind of risen at the same time as my studies in equine exercise physiology. So it's been pretty cool. But yeah, a lot of times I'll come across a question in my own training and be like, I wonder if that applies to horses, and I'll dig and see if I can find research that backs it up or points me in a different direction. A lot of this stuff there's just still not yet good research about, and I'm hoping that changes. Even like the warm-up stuff, it's interesting to me that we only have really valid science for that's come out in the last like 10 years. I mean, how long have we been riding horses? So
this is one of those, I kind of have a personal fight against dogma because we have so many people that are still doing the same thing that their trainer taught their trainer who taught their trainer, and the methodology they're working under is 80 years old. And knowing what like we've learned so much in the last 10, 15, 20 years. If you're still doing what they were doing 80 years ago, you're in the dark ages.
yeah.
So it's not that there isn't value in the old masters or anything like that, but they were trying to progress and do as good as they could too. They just didn't have access to the information that we've got. So if you don't use the information that we've got, it's like slapping them in the face, basically, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, there was something else I was fixing. You are you're stimulating to my mind. Everything you say makes me, oh yeah, and then I think of this and this, and I
Oh.
cannot. It's like trying to catch little sparks coming out of a fire or something. Oh, backing a horse. Okay, so I've been backing horses in the cow horse world for a long, long, long time. And this is something you may not know about me, but my actual first paid riding job was riding race horses. So I used to be under 150 pounds and riding in a 4-pound saddle and breezing thoroughbreds and stuff like that. And the basic thing among the racehorse trainers were there were two things that you never did. You never said whoa, and you never backed a horse up. And I have just about never found any aspect of English that appreciated backing a horse up. And in fact, I sent a personal email to a fellow YouTube trainer who's a classical dressage guy and was kind of just asking him. I had gotten a Lusitano gelding of my own and just kind of was curious. I noticed y'all don't, you've got backing a horse and stuff way down the line. You don't do that until they're pretty damn broke already. Why is it that you don't see any value in backing a horse? And he didn't really get into the why, but basically said there is no value in backing a horse. And my experience tells me that's not at all true. And so I love that you are throwing that in there and talking about the value in it, because to me there's almost nothing that strengthens the hind end and the loin like backing does. It's so much faster at getting that area strong than anything you can do going forward. I think it's like you say, you can't really isolate a muscle, but you can kind of isolate a half. And
it's hugely beneficial physiologically. And it's frustrating because I came up in this very English world, and I didn't back I like never backed them up. And I wrote an article about it, but then I came across body workers, equine body workers and chiropractors, and they kept saying, oh, back them up 30, 60 steps a day. It's so good for their pelvis. And when you watch, these cameras now that we can hook up while a horse is backing up and see what's happening with his bones inside of there, you're like, oh, wow, look at that mobility, that side to side motion. And then also just the repetitive motion of a hoof landing, heel toe, heel toe, heel toe, like they always do. When you ask them to step backwards, you totally change that stimulus on the deep digital flexor tendons and those lower limb structures. And it's immensely valuable. And also stretching out the hamstring. There's just so much that's good to it. So, but anyway, I was frustrated, and I wrote, this is back when Dressage Today magazine was in existence. I used to write for them regularly. And I pitched this article on backing up. Why do we not do it until 4th level, for God's sakes? And so they said, okay, you can write this article, but only if you interview, these fancy pants trainers, these Olympians. And so they gave me the names, and I called these people up. I am not making this up. One of them said to me, I'm not even going to tell you who it was. She said to me, well, no, we don't have much backing up in our test, because I was like, even at the Grand Prix level, I think they back up like 4 or 6 steps. And that's it. It's a one-shot deal. And she said, well, there's no value in backing up. I said, well, I don't really physiologically. And she said, no, puts the horse on the forehand. I said, well, if you really believe that, then why is it in the dressage test at all? And she said, wait for it. Well, you want to prove your horse has certain skills, like, backing out of a trailer. I'm like, are you kidding? You're not kidding. Hopefully, since then, that was a lot of years ago. Hopefully the thinking has changed. But I was just like, people, we are missing the boat here.
Yeah, I would, if your horse is backing on the forehand, he's just not doing it right yet. That's okay. There's a lot of things they don't do right at first, but there should be nothing that, like I have to literally tie my horse's tails up in a knot, because once I've been riding them for very long, they squat so much they'll step on their damn tail. Now you're telling me that horse is on his forehand? I'm sorry, but that's not the picture that should be in your mind,
Yeah, no.
So, anyway, I absolutely love that you said that. You could be the pioneer of fixing that, because on the other hand, like, I would on just this whole turf war of Western versus English, like, I mean, keeping a powerful weapon away from your enemy is always in your interest, right? So maybe I need to keep my mouth shut about
Oh,
this.
there you go.
But
Yeah, yeah.
it is a powerful weapon. Folks, if you're not backing your horse, back your horse.
Yeah.
A couple things I'll say about it. So you and I are somewhat different in that I'm new to the party on the fitness athlete. Well, not, I mean, I consider them athletes, but I'm always riding the mind. And so how long the ride is dictated by the behaviors and the mind and where they are and so forth for me.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I love about backing a horse is that it is very unnatural to them. So as we're starting to talk more about the brain science and all of that stuff, if you have a horse that gets stuck in the sympathetic nervous system where he's not consciously thinking, you can start backing him and it forces him to think, because now he's doing something unnatural he has to focus on. And it's a powerful tool to get a horse out of that mindset and back into the here and now and focusing on what you want. I find it just to be, God, I couldn't live without backing. I mean, it's a big tool in the toolbox for me, for sure, for a lot of reasons. Also, I mean, I think advancing as a horseman, no matter what discipline you're in, tends to be more about understanding footfalls and things like that, which seems deceptively simple, but I'm sure, as you know, gets significantly more complicated the more you get into it. I think if you and I were to ask the general public, probably 90% of people would have no idea that horses back on diagonals. And if you're into the English world, you should definitely be on the path of dissecting what diagonals do and how they function. And now here's a whole other world of where they exist that I don't think a lot of people knew before. And so start looking for it, folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, Jec, I've kept you a long time. I have really enjoyed this conversation, I have to say. I think this went really well, and I think we got into some good territory with this talk. One thing I did forget to mention earlier is that Jec is the host of another podcast, the Best Horse Practices Podcast. So y'all should all check her out over there. As you can tell, she has a wealth of information and knowledge to share with the world, and she does a pretty darn good job of articulating all that knowledge that she has. So thank you, Jec, for coming on. I appreciate it greatly.
Oh, thank you so much, Daniel. This was really great. I hope that, I hope it was good for you and that was fun. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and we'll definitely have links in the show notes and everything to her website and her programs and books and all of that good stuff, so y'all can check her out. I don't think there's a whole lot of people on the planet that have got a book written that is described by the Dressage Foundation as critical for every rider to own. That's a pretty damn big, that's a big feather in the cap right there. Yeah. So, well, Jec, I'm sure we'll get to see you at the summit next year, but looking forward to meeting you face to face again, and hope we get to ride together somewhere down the road.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Take care.
Yes, ma'am. You too. We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.